Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of SCSA's Webinar Wednesday. It's my honor today and pleasure to introduce our guest speakers today. They come from Occupational Safety and Health, and I'll turn it over to them. They have a great presentation today on harassment, and I will have them introduce themselves and get into the presentation. So thank you. Take it away.
Good afternoon. My name is Susan Bowen. I'm the team lead for the Harassment and Discriminatory Action Prevention Unit. Today I will be presenting with Ian Gardner, another officer within the unit. So I'll do the first half. Ian will take over and do the second half. I will be talking mostly about the effects of harassment and what harassment is and what bullying is. Ian's going to then get into what isn't harassment and things like reasonable managerial action, responsibilities of those of us in the workplace. Okay, so I will get my techie guy Ian here to put us on Zoom. You won't be able to see us because to just see the presentation. So please bear with us. This is new to us, the whole Zoom thing. And I hope it goes well, and if it does, I will be thrilled. We'll try and keep it to under the hour, and at the end, we'll just let you know that any questions, comments, anything, there'll be a number for you to call if you have anything that you'd like to discuss with us. And whenever you watch this, it doesn't matter, you can call us with any questions that you might have, okay? So, like I said, we are the Harassment and Discriminatory Action Prevention Unit. We are under the Legal Affairs branch within Occupational Health and Safety. In this unit, we have myself as the supervisor, team lead. We have a director over us who is Joel Bender. He's our director, and he's a lawyer. And within the unit, we have 3 officers in Regina, 3 officers in Saskatchewan, and 2 intake officers, because we get probably more calls in this unit than the rest of OHS combined. So there's a need to have an intake process, or we would just be on the phone all day. Okay, so today this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the background and history of harassment in the province. We're going to talk about the new legislative definition of harassment. So there are 2 definitions of harassment, and I will explain what both of those are. I'm going to talk about what reasonable managerial action is, because we are not here to take over workplaces. We are here to ensure that managers and owners and workers all participate in a harassment-free workplace. I'm going to talk a bit about bullies. So bullies and harassers, we use that word interchangeably. Basically, your bully or your harasser is very similar to the schoolyard. The bully grows up and they become the harasser in the workplace. Same dynamic. Talk about the victim. We talk about what happens to the victim, what happens to the victim's family, how they suffer. We give examples. We can tell you things that have happened. We just can't tell you obviously who these people are and what the workplace is. So we might say, in a large box store in the province, right? And this is what happened. We talk about duties of workers, supervisors, and managers regarding harassment. We talk about discriminatory action, which is probably the most misunderstood word we have. Discriminatory, people think that means discrimination, but it doesn't. And Ian will explain what that means. And then we talk about the appeal process, because we write a decision and that can be appealed to an adjudicator, but that's the part that Ian will be talking about. So a lot of you are probably on your Occupational Health and Safety Committee at work, so you know what the Act and regulations are. It's that great big book that has now become the Saskatchewan Employment Act. So if you are in the committee, then you understand how large this act and regulations are, and obviously you don't need to learn the whole act and regulations, but there will be specific things to your workplace that you will have to know. So the acting regulations require employers to prevent harassment if they know it's happening, stop it if they know it's happening, and to develop and implement a policy that complies with Regulation 36. So that sounds like it should be pretty simple, and I wish it was, but unfortunately, it's not that simple, and we'll explain why. Okay, so there are two types of harassment in provincial legislation. The first one is prohibited grounds harassment, and that is very similar to your human rights definition. And so that definition was in place since the 90s, but in 2007, the definition of harassment expanded to include personal harassment. So personal harassment is your bullying type of harassment. This new harassment is not retroactive, the bullying part. It has to have happened after 2007. You can't say, well, back in 2005, this happened to me, because it's not retroactive. That definition wasn't in place yet. We're very similar to Quebec's model. Quebec did a really good job. You know, they informed workplaces, they hired workers with occupational health and safety, and then they rolled it out. Saskatchewan kind of did it in reverse, and so there's a lot of catch up, right? We'd go into workplaces saying, do you have your updated version? And most didn't, and so we did cut them quite a bit of slack for a while, but it's since 2007, and most workplaces need to know this now. So how do the two definitions read now? The first one is your prohibited grounds, definition 1, the one that's been here since the 90s. So this is any inappropriate conduct, comment, display, action, or gesture by a person that is made on the basis of race, creed, religion, color, sex, sexual orientation, marital status, family status, disability, physical size or weight, age, nationality, ancestry, or place of origin, and constitute a threat to the health and safety of a worker. So you would think that would cover pretty much everything, but it doesn't even come close. I would say maybe 6%, 7% of our cases each year are prohibited grounds. So most of them are personal harassment, and that's what we're going to spend most of our time talking today about. So what is personal harassment? That's any inappropriate conduct, comment, display, action, or gesture by a person that adversely affects a worker's psychological or physical well-being. So we've all seen someone who is being harassed, is being bullied, is being tormented at work. Whether you're in the schoolyard, whether you're in the workplace, you know how that affects a person's psychological or physical well-being. We get people coming to us saying, I've been off work on stress leave for the last 6 months. I'm on a cocktail of medication. I'm having anxiety-related seizures. I'm driving to work with a bucket between my legs, vomiting. So just imagine what that's doing to your physical well-being, your psychological well-being. And these people some of them are absolutely broken. I always think back to a case that we had where I knew this guy that came to us at one point, and his life from childhood was awful. So he didn't know this, but I remembered him. And he grew up in a small town that I had grown up in, and he had a birth defect that made him look, surprisingly different, right, than everyone. And so, I remember in grade 3, this guy was, he was bullied all of his life. And then he was taken away by child welfare because his parents were also beating him. And then I worked in the prison system, and he came through the prison system. And then at one point, he actually filed a complaint with us because he was being tormented so bad in a construction job in the province. And I just thought, man, this guy has been a target his entire life, no fault of his own. So, it hopefully gives some people some compassion to hear some of these stories, from a little boy. This guy was a target his whole life just because of the way he looked. And the last time I saw him going down a back alley, pushing a shopping cart, collecting bottles out of bins. So obviously the workplace didn't work out for him very well either. So here the perpetrator knows. So when we say perpetrator, we're talking about the bully or the harasser, or reasonably know that it would cause a worker to be humiliated or intimidated. And it constitutes a threat to the health and safety of this worker. So these are some examples of personal harassment, things that we get brought to us quite often. So lots of times this helps our job because people will come to us with a binder of information and say, here's what my boss is sending me. Here's the text messages. Here's the emails. We had a case where an individual was texting his staff, late at night saying, I'm in the trees waiting for you. Why won't you let me in? Things like that. And like some of the things that I can't believe people put in writing, they do. And it's actually made our job a little bit easier. We had a guy that was trying to get one of his workers, was grooming one of his workers over text message to try to provide nude photos. He saw a weakness in this young girl in that she was going through a hard time. She had lost her apartment, and he was the owner of this workplace, and he used this opportunity to try to groom her and give her extra money and wage to try to be his affair. Anyway, she brought all this to us saying, what do I do? This is my boss. So anyway, we ended up having to talk to corporate and deal with that. But like I'm saying, verbal or written abuse or threats, it's made our job easier, but it's also made life tough for people, and especially young people who are being tormented through social media. Insulting, derogatory, degrading comments, jokes, gestures, personal ridicule or malicious gossip. Like, who has never been a target of gossip? Especially when what's being said about you isn't true. You know how that feels, right? It's awful. I remember I worked in the prison system for 20 years. When I started, there were very few women. And the stories that they told about us were horrific. And I went home every day just trying to survive. I wouldn't let them see it at work that it had gotten to me, but it did. And finally, they gave up and they moved on to other girls that had come in. And at that time, I was relieved. But then I became a manager, and I helped the others, and I dealt with the others who had been treating others this way. Work sabotage. Maybe let's say you work in the healthcare system. You're a nurse. If somebody's trying to harass you, you come into work. You need some information to do your job. So let's say you need some information on a patient. Those going off that are targeting you aren't going to give you the information you need to do your job. And why is that? Because they want you to look incompetent, or they want you to get in trouble. Refusing to work or cooperate with others. You're never going to love everybody you work with, and if you do, you're very lucky. But just because somebody's different or you don't really like their style, we're all different. You can't refuse to work or cooperate with others just because you don't like them. If they're unsafe, that's another thing. But just because you don't like them, that just doesn't fly. Interference with or vandalism of personal property. When I got into this job, coming from the prison system, I thought I'd seen everything, but not even close. We've seen people with tires slashed, windows smashed out of their vehicles, their houses. People having used condoms put in their mailboxes at work. And then, of course, there's the unwelcome physical contact, and that's a big part of our job. And lots of times we tell them to go to the police, and they do, but the police don't always take it on, and the police can't really do anything about the workplace situation, right? So that's when we get involved. We have a lot of cases where there is abuse in the workplace. I'll give you two examples. One of physical assault. We had a young guy that came to us and said, I'd only been on the job a few days. He was working in a remote area, working construction, and he wanted to know if this was okay, what had happened to him. So he was sitting in the lunchroom, And all of a sudden, all the guys sitting in the lunchroom with him got up and ran out. And he was sitting there looking around. Why'd everybody run out? Well, the boss walked in, angry, grabbed him, picked him up, punched him in the face, dropped him down. He went running outside. The guys are outside, standing around the corner. He's like, "What just happened? Why did he do that?" He goes, "Oh, that's just the guy. That's just what he does. If you see him coming in looking like that, just run." Okay, that's not okay. So he wanted to know if that was okay, if that can happen to him in the workplace. No, it can't. It's not okay. An example of a lot of sexual assaults that we have in the workplace, sexual abuse, sexual assault, sexual harassment. We get a lot of that. We lots of times refer them to the police as well, but we also deal with it. And we were actually the first, I think in Canada, to do a successful prosecution on a sexual harassment, sexual abuse. In this circumstance, it was a store owner who owned a computer store, and this was in the news a few years back, who was videotaping his workers in the bathroom. And one of the workers went into the bathroom that day, and it was just a bathroom like you have in your house, and like just one toilet, one sink. And she was sitting there using the washroom, and she noticed this cardboard box that was always there, but she got kind of interested in it and wondered why there was a hole in it. So she got up, looked in the box, noticed there was a video camera taped in there, and the red light was on and it was recording. So she left the bathroom to go get her phone to take a picture of this. And what happened is the owner's standing there. And why is he standing there? Because he saw her see this from the other back office. So at the end of the day, yeah, he had been doing it. He had been doing it for several years. Unfortunately, these girls don't work there anymore. There's a restraining order, and they were out. But it was successful with the police and with us as a prosecution. So what is bullying? So I'm sure every one of us can think about somebody that they've been exposed to that's treated them like this. So bullying is the act of intentionally, and this is the most important word, is intentionally, and we'll get into more why that's the most important word. So it's intentionally causing harm to others through verbal harassment, physical assault, or other more subtle methods of coercion, such as manipulation. So getting you to do things that you wouldn't normally do, or getting you to do things that would get you in trouble. They're doing it on purpose. So if I said to a coworker, let's say Ian, who's here with me today, if I said, "Ian, what you did, what you said was just crossed the line. It made me feel terrible. I didn't like it." And he didn't stop, and he kept doing it. You've got intent. Okay, if I was intending to cause harm to somebody or harass them, I'm going to keep doing it. I'm not going to stop, and I'm probably going to escalate it. So if you're wondering if you have a bully, these are some of the ways that you can tell. So workplace bullying includes verbal, nonverbal, psychological abuse, and humiliation, and it's characterized 5 ways. Through repetition. It doesn't just happen once. Okay, if it happens once and stops, maybe somebody's having a bad day. Maybe, cut them some slack if they yell at you one day and they're not normally like that and they're not like that tomorrow. We all have bad days, right? Duration, it goes on and on and on, and it escalates. So, like I said, with that guy that was grooming the worker, it starts out by saying, "How are you doing? Maybe I can help you out. I heard that you're having some trouble with your work, with your home life. How would $500 help you?" Okay. Then it's like escalating to, "Well, what am I going to get for this?" And escalating to, "Come to my office." So it gets worse. It doesn't get better. It escalates. It's usually a power disparity. So that's an example of an employer with a power disparity. We have quite a bit of that with immigrant workers in the province. We work with the Immigration Integrity Unit now, Ian actually worked there prior to coming here. And so it's really helpful because he has a lot of knowledge in what we can do to help them. But in some cases, employers bring them here, mistreat them, and basically say, do what I say or I'm sending you back. They can't do that. That's an offense under the Immigration Act. And we've learned a lot about treatment and power disparity with immigrant workers. And the number one way is intent. And again, if you tell somebody to stop and they don't, and they escalate and it goes on and on and on, you've probably got yourself a bully. We had a case not too long ago where a bunch of workers complained to us about the treatment they were receiving from this one worker. And eventually the employer set up a camera in a common area, caught this person doing this, they were terminated, okay? A couple years later, I've been in this job long enough so I can see repetition. A couple years later, we're getting, similar incidents are happening. I'm thinking, geez, this sounds familiar. These tactics sound familiar. Same person, different workplace, doing the same thing. So I'll talk a little bit about the characteristics of a bully, but they've learned on some level that this is what they need to do to get what they want or to survive in the world. So some common tactics of bullying: falsely accusing people of errors they didn't make. Why are they doing this? To make you feel like you're a total screw up every day, all day. Giving you the silent treatment. You all know what that feels like when your wife won't talk to you, your husband, your kid, your coworker. Just another tactic to make you feel crappy, right? Creating rules on the fly. So the rules are different for you than they are for everybody else. Disregarding your quality work. If you're being targeted, this person's not going to like that you're doing quality work, and they're not going to ever let you know that you're doing a good job. Constantly criticizing you, so looking for things to pick at. Setting different standards. So I'm the team lead for this unit. So let's say I have in this office, I have Ian and John. So I like John, but I don't really care for Ian, and I want him to fail. So I'll say, John, by the end of this week, would you mind getting this one case done? If you can't, don't worry about it. I'll give you a hand. Maybe we can give you a bit longer. Ian, I need these 10 files done by the end of the week. No, I don't want to hear any excuses. You don't, you're out of here. Okay, so the standards are going to be different for one person than they are for another. Using confidential information to humiliate you. So maybe I know something about Ian. Maybe Ian came and told me something. He's having trouble with his wife, or he has a drinking problem or something. Well, what am I going to do? I'm going to take that to the rest of the unit and make a big joke about it. Making unrealistic demands. So basically setting you up to fail. They ignore, they overrule, they isolate, and they exclude. What happens to the victims? So like I said, when I think about a victim, I always picture that lady that came to us and said she drives to work every day with a bucket between her legs vomiting. So that's what happens. When I worked in the prison system in the beginning, I was sick all the time. I'd go home and just go to bed. That's the only place I felt safe. So what happens to the victims? The victims can suffer from long-term emotional problems. So, we have people calling us from the psych ward saying, I'm on this cocktail of medication. I'm having seizures. All of my hair is falling out. They can go into lengthy periods of depression, and we have suicides. We've looked into 5 suicides in the last year and a half related to workplace harassment, physical problems. So the stress of it, the anxiety, your immune system is shot because you know what stress can do to you, right? What stress does to you, driving to work every day with a bucket between your legs vomiting. What does that do to your system? Stress can kill you. Behavior problems. So you've lost your confidence. You're deemed a screw up. You're never told you're doing any good. So what happens is you start missing work. You go into isolation. You're using all of your sick time. And then as a result, you're getting into trouble at work. Because you have academic problems too. You can't concentrate. So it's really difficult when you're going to work every day just trying to survive and to concentrate on your work when you're wondering what's coming, what's my boss going to do today, or what are my coworkers going to put me through today. I think about that guy that I went to elementary school, what's the world been like for him? How much confidence does he have? Very little. He has so much confidence that, all he does is pick bottles out of trash cans now. And that's really, really sad. And so, I don't think a lot of people mean to hurt people at work or in the world, but some really do. But just remember, how far kindness can go, and what a difference a cruel remark can make. We remember the cruel remarks so much more than the positive remarks for whatever reason. I think that's just it's in our DNA. We just it's primitive brain, right? We're trying to survive. So at work, bullying causes loss of productivity, an increase in absenteeism, and overall disgruntled employees. So you go into a job thinking this is going to be awesome. This is what I want to do. Let's say you're a welder. You go to school. You're now a journeyman welder. You start this great job, and every day you go there, you're a target, and your life has just become hell. So there's been numerous reports on the effects of workplace harassments. And the reports point to the strong influence of workplace culture and employee mental health. The more frequently workers are harassed, the more hostile they perceive their workplaces, and the less satisfied they are in their jobs. So most of us can think about a job where we had great coworkers, great boss. You loved your job. You didn't mind going there every day, right? Like I don't have an easy job, but I have a great boss. I have great people that I work with, and I'm generally feel pretty lucky to have the job that I do. But I've had jobs where I was a target, where I just tried to survive every day, and where my boss wouldn't help me. And I was more hostile. I was less satisfied with my job, and all I did all day was look for another one. So who's a bully? According to research, adults who bully have personalities that are authoritarian, combined with a strong need to control or dominate. It's also suggested that a deficit in social skills and a prejudicial view of subordinates can be particular risk factors. The bullies are typically quick to anger and use of force, and they mistake the actions of others as hostile. And the number one thing that these guys and women are concerned with is preserving their self-image. So they don't ever want to look bad. They mistake everybody's actions, unless they're a buddy of theirs, as it might mean this, it might mean that, because they're always on alert for something that might hurt their self-image. Another thing that happens to victims, we see all the time, is they don't just suffer at work. Their personal relationships suffer as well. So it's really difficult to go through what you're going through at work. Think about the lady, driving to work with a bucket between her legs, vomiting. What does that do to let's say you're married, you got a husband and 2 kids. Can you go home at the end of the day after being tormented and targeted at work all day and just be okay? If you can, that I am in awe of you. But when I went through it, I couldn't. Like I said, I just wanted to go to my room and go to bed and be alone. But some people can't do that, and you have a life outside of work. So we have people all the time saying, I've lost everything. I've lost my health. I've lost my husband. I've lost my kids. They're now living with their husband in another house. And I'm sitting here on stress leave, completely broken. So marital pressure caused by the victim's anxiety and anger, and loss of friends, because what happens is you obsess about the situation and people are sick of hearing it and they don't want to hear about it anymore. So what does this equal? It equals more loss. So you don't only have the workplace situation, you sometimes have your personal relationships suffering as well. So what do you do? Ian's going to get more into this, but basically, if you can, let them know how you feel. And it's really difficult to do that, but that's the way that you form intent, right? If I say to somebody, doing that made me feel this way, and they continue to do it, well, then they're attempting to do that on purpose, right? If it doesn't stop, bring it to the attention of your supervisor or employer, and they can either look into it. If they don't look into it, that's when you come to us. But that's going to be more of Ian's portion to talk about. Lots of times, though, cases we get, and I'd say half the cases we get, are actually conflict. So we ask people, does this necessarily have to be harassment? Or could this be a personality conflict? And these two things are often confused with each other. So these are the 5 main types of conflict at work. And the first one is interdependence conflict. So your work depends on someone else's input and output. So let's say Ian and I make widgets together. We're a team. And at the end of the day, we get paid per widget. And at the end of the day, I produce 50 widgets and Ian produces 15 consistently. I'm going to be ticked off because I'm dependent on his output. Okay, so that can cause a big conflict. Differences in style. There's different types of personalities. We all came up, we were raised differently in different families, different backgrounds, different everything. And we have different personality types. There's introverts, there's extroverts, there's hard-driven type A personalities, and there's the more gentle B personalities that like to have meetings and socialize, and it drives the A's crazy, right? Because they're hard-driven. They want it done this way and that way. And I'm kind of like that, and I had to take a step back because I was getting irritated, with other people's lack of progress. When they'd get it done, they just get it done their way and in their time. And I have to realize people have different personality types and they do it different ways. Differences in background and gender, differences in leadership. Leaders have different styles. So these last 2 are probably 2 of the most that we get. So you get a new boss. You had a great boss who was more of a coddler. No, that's okay. You need to drop Timmy off at work in the morning and come in late at 9 every day. No, that's okay. And you have to leave at 3:30, no problem. Well, that's awesome, right? Now you get a new boss. No. You got to figure this out. Everybody else figures it out. You work at 8 to 5 and you get an hour for lunch, and that's the expectation. We get a call. My boss hates me. Well, it might suck, but it's not harassment, right? Your boss has a right to lead the way they lead. And unfortunately, it's not as nice as having the boss that, come in early or come in late and leave early, but they have the right to lead their way within the parameters of that job. And differences in personality. And these are fueled by emotion usually and perception about someone else's motives and character. And we have people, I'll give you an example on this one and then it's Ian's turn. I had a good friend of mine worked in a town in the province, and she worked in the mental health area. And she started work at this new job. And from day one, there was a lady that clearly didn't like her. She'd walk into a room, the lady would huff and walk out. They'd be in a meeting, my friend would talk, the lady would roll her eyes. She'd turn her back to her. She'd leave the room if my friend walked in every time. So finally, after about a year of this, my friend said to the lady, "Did I do something to you? Is there a reason you don't like me?" And she said, "Don't you remember?" My friend said, "No, I don't think I ever met you before this job." And she said, 5 years ago, your son had a birthday party and didn't invite my son. So my friend said, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Her son was in grade 1, came home. Here's a list of the kids going to my party." She called them. One little boy didn't get invited. So this lady believed it was done on purpose for whatever reason. She took offense to it and spent the rest of their workplace time together acting like this. So is it really necessary? Everybody feels that going on. Is it necessary to hate somebody because they think differently than you? You know, we have people that if you have a disagreement, they will hate you for the rest of their lives. Is it really necessary, right? So, you know, a lot of what we get is the conflict, and we partner with labor relations and mediation now. So if you are an employer listening to this, we can hook you up with labor relations and mediation, who are under our ministry but a separate entity, and they can help out with a mediation or a conflict resolution, and it's a free service that that they provide to in a workplace. Okay, so Ian's going to take over now, and he's going to talk a bit about what harassment is not.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ian Gardner, and I'm an officer with Occupational Health and Safety in the Harassment Discriminatory Action Unit under Susan. So Susan got all the really exciting stuff about what harassment is, and I get to tell everybody what harassment is not. But I may be looping back to some other points in this presentation, so bear with me if I do that. Harassment is not any reasonable action taken by an employer or supervisor relating to the management and direction of the employer's workers or the place of employment. Now, so under the legislation, the term is actually reasonable managerial action. And an example of this, you know, Susan had given some of the examples of what harassment is, for example, workplace sabotage. So I'm going to take one of Susan's examples directly from the presentation and give it a bit of a twist. Susan had mentioned that she's got two individuals in the office, John and Ian, and Ian being myself, I'm always the bad example in Susan's presentations, just so you know, but she gave the two examples of John and Ian, and she gives me 10 files in a week, 2 files in a week. Now, on the surface of what Susan said, yes, that may be construed as harassing behavior, but if it's found to be a reasonable managerial action, an example of that would be that the 2 files that John have might be extremely complex, and the 10 files that Ian have might be lightweights. And so those deadlines that she might be giving John and Ian, why they may sound, of course, the way that can be determined is through an investigation. But we do see a lot of harassment complaints where it's not necessarily harassment or workplace sabotage, even though the worker might feel like that. It is deemed to be reasonable managerial action. So that, again, that's an example that I can give just off the top of my head. Again, the way that Susan presented it was very different. That, you know, I'm fired if I don't get these done, and John's got all the time in the world. But, you know, just to look at that and you know, with a different lens, right? Because the manager can assign things that are you know, reasonable deemed by them, but of course, you know, what Susan had mentioned earlier was it's about a level of equality, treating all the workers in an equal fashion based on the positions that they're in. So at work, the employer's duty is to manage and supervise workers. Reasonable managerial action, as I said before, is not harassment, even if it involves unpleasant consequences. So again, looping back to an earlier example from Susan, Susan had stated that you know, you may have one boss that's we for example, we get a lot of complaints where someone will say, you know, I've done it this way. I've done my job this way for 15 years. I got a new manager and they want me to do it this way, and this way is stupid, or this way is inefficient. Unfortunately for that worker, that is reasonable managerial action. Now, if it's unsafe or something that is, you know, again, maybe, you know, can be construed as workplace sabotage, of course, then that's something to be looked at as harassing behavior. But if it's purely different managerial styles, unfortunately for the worker, you know, the employer might have a reason for the work being done in a different way. I know that doesn't make a lot of workers happy when they want to make a complaint, and sometimes workers do feel they're being sabotaged. And again, only through a proper investigation where both sides of the story are collected and analyzed can that truth come out. And a lot of times that's done internally within the company. You know, when we get a complaint that may look like reasonable managerial action, we will state to the worker, have you complained to the employer about it? Have you spoken to the employer about it? And you know, the worker says, no, I have not. We send them back to the employer, because occupational health and safety cannot supersede the employer's right to solve their own problems. And take and investigate harassment complaints. The first line has to be the employer. They have to have the opportunity to fix it. When they fail or they choose not to address the harassment complaint and fix it, is when occupational health safety steps in. So examples of reasonable action. We talked about this, I gave those two examples, but things like work assignments, appraisal of performance and attendance, progressive discipline, training, supervision, establishing deadlines, and establishing dress code and hygiene standards. These are all things that are seen as reasonable managerial action. And again, flipping back and forth between Susan's portion of the presentation and mine, one of the ones we see quite often is progressive discipline. We see people that maybe feel that they are being progressively disciplined, for unnecessary reasons or for no reason at all. That actually could fall under harassing behavior. However, as long as the employer is following a policy, I'll give an example of that one. I had a case where an individual had a pretty spotless work record for a number of years, and then a new employer came in. There was a bit of conflict off the hop, and the employer issued a 3 days. The manager who had the issues with the worker issued a 3-day suspension to the worker. Upon a further look at that, it appeared to be that this employer was insubordinate and earned a 3-day suspension. Unfortunately for the manager, they didn't follow their proper policies and procedures. They should have started with a verbal warning, a written warning, possibly a 1-day suspension, and this was all laid out in the company policy, but instead they jumped straight to the 3-day suspension, which was a breach of their policy and therefore deemed to be harassing behavior and a form of workplace sabotage by kind of skipping over the progressive discipline piece and not following the company policy. Again, the manager can train. We've seen complaints from workers that are longtime employees that don't want to take additional training or don't want to train for certain aspects of their job if they may have changed. We see this a lot with technology, for example, and older workers maybe feeling they're being discriminated against due to their age and their lack of technological know-how. Again, unfortunately for that worker in a case like that, as long as the employer is providing you that training and providing it to in a way that that you can properly do that training, that would be considered reasonable managerial action. And the employer is allowed to establish deadlines. Again, I gave the example of Susan's example of deadlines. Giving different deadlines to different workers, but again, the discussion has to be had, or the communication has to be had as to why one worker may have different deadlines than the other, because there may be a very valid and reasonable reason for that. And then the last one, and this is the most important to us, of course, is examples of reasonable action is enforcing occupational health and safety standards. I'll give a very simple example of this one. Go to a work site and the workers aren't wearing hard hats. And the worker says, well, it's a hot day today, I don't want to wear my hard hat. And I'm up on a roof anyway, so what's going to fall on my head? Well, it's not the worker's decision. If the employer says that you have to wear a hard hat and it's policy to have a hat on that site, you should have the hat on. It's absolutely not harassment if somebody's telling you to, if somebody's doing something to further your safety on a work site, that is not a harassing behavior. Now, harassment is, we've kind of skipped into this here, mistreatment perpetrated by another employee, e.g. supervisor to worker, worker to worker, or worker to supervisor. Mistreatment perpetrated by someone other than an employee with whom the worker is required to work, i.e. clients in the public. This is under the legislative definition. We have questions about this a lot from employers. Again, I'll give you an example, a real life example. We had a girl that worked in an off sale, and she was being harassed by one of the customers. And when she approached her employer with a complaint, the employer said, well, first of all, he's a member of the public, can't do anything about it. And second of all, he's a really good customer of ours, so just, kind of take it. Well, the employee wasn't satisfied with that, rightfully so, pointed out to the employer and came to us, and we pointed out that third-party harassment is covered under the legislation. And so the employer was required to do something about that worker. In that specific case, because they're a private business, and even a public business, even a government office. They had to put a set of rules in place for that worker, or for that member of the public when they came into the store, so that that worker wouldn't be harassed and would have a harassment-free workplace. This could apply to anyone who comes in the workplace. This could apply to the guy that is the janitor at night. This could apply to the person who delivers the water. Third-party harassment, and again, also members of the public or clients. The worker's protected from all of that under the legislation, and it is the employer's obligation to ensure a harassment-free workplace at all times. Harassment, workplace harassment under the legislation covers incidents that occur at work and during work hours. That one's quite obvious, but also extends to incidents that happen outside the usual workplace hours but are connected to or arise out of the worker's employment. So if a bunch of workers go out for a drink at night voluntarily, it's not a workplace function, and harassment or harassing behavior occurs, even though they are coworkers. That was a personal choice. However, if it's a company function, say a company barbecue or a seminar that people travel out of town for work, that can be covered as well. So, work sponsor, social event, conference, I gave those two examples, but those are covered under the legislation because you're obligated to be there as part of your work, and therefore, the workplace harassment policy extends to that. So I'm going to go into the duties under the legislation, the role of the employer, the role of the worker, and the role of the OHS division. As I stated earlier, the OHS does not supersede the employer's right to solve the harassment issues when they're brought forward. We're here to provide advice as well, both to employers and to workers when they wish to complain. But we don't become directly involved in an investigation until the employer either fails to do a proper investigation, or when the employer fails to address the harassment complaint at all. So employers must take action to prevent and stop harassment, fulfill their legal duty under Section 3(8)D of the Act, which will come up in the next slide, and develop and implement a harassment policy that meets the requirements of Regulation 36, also in future slides. So Section 3(8)D states every employer shall ensure, insofar as reasonably practicable, that the employer's workers are not exposed to harassment with respect to any matter or circumstance arising out of the worker's employment. The important part of this piece of legislation is the insofar as is reasonably practicable. The employer can only do so much, and the worker can't guide how the employer deems it reasonably practicable. So, again, I'll give another real-world example. We had a young lady who was being sexually harassed at work. Nothing physical contact, but many comments, inappropriate comments in the workplace. She complained to the employer, and these two individuals worked in an open workspace, and the employer's solution was to move this gentleman about 15 feet away from her so that they wouldn't have direct contact. She wouldn't be subject to those comments. Well, the worker came back to us and said, I appreciate that they moved him out of my area. However, he can still look down the table at me and give me dirty eyes all week because I had him moved. Absolutely right. So we went back to the employer and said, is there a better solution? So the employer, amended that solution, said, kind of apologized and amended and realized that was an insufficient solution. It's a little harder to prove looks as opposed to inappropriate comments. However, in determining that they needed to do something, they needed to do a bit more. So what they did was they ended up completely removing this guy. They ended up having her report to a different supervisor because she was still reporting to him as a supervisor on a supposedly professional level. They gave her a new supervisor, and the worker was satisfied with that. But the worker can be engaged in the process, or the complainant can be engaged in the process. But it is ultimately the employer's responsibility insofar as reasonably practicable. Probably 90% of the complaints come in, harassment complaints, the worker requests that the harasser be fired. OHS can't also step in legislatively to demand that. However, if there was, for example, a serial bully, somebody like Susan had stated, OHS may step in and say, this is a problem throughout multiple workplaces and something that you should work a little harder to address to the employer. But we still put the onus of responsibility on the employer to resolve that in a way that's reasonably practicable. The employer can choose to fire this individual. They can choose to discipline. They can choose to suspend them. But it has to be done so that the worker's not experiencing harassment anymore. So in the case I gave you earlier, that woman was still feeling harassed in the workplace because this individual now had a grudge against her for getting him moved. So the employer did correct that. We accepted that correction, and we made these suggestions with the employer on how to try to fix that situation in the future. How to meet this duty as the employer. First of all, the employer must commit to preventing and stopping harassment, train their workers, supervisors, and management about harassment prevention. This could be something like, having this a presentation such as this, or ensuring that everyone knows where the harassment policy is located and that they've read it and understand the definitions of harassment. And use the harassment policy and be consistent and timely. We do receive complaints from workers saying, I put in my harassment complaint 3 months ago and nothing's happened. Maybe something has happened, but the worker has not been made aware of it. They do have to be made aware of the results of investigation. They don't have to be made aware of the full investigation, but they do have to be privy to the results and actions taken going forward. So that's very important. And like I said, it affects the worker's mental health if an investigation either drags on unnecessarily or kind of gets dropped halfway through because the worker then feels like the employer is not addressing and fulfilling their duty under the legislation. And then document training and complaints. So documenting that the workers know what harassment is, the definitions, and how to make complaints, and also documenting any complaints. As Susan said, if those complaints about the individual bully that she mentioned earlier in the presentation had not been documented properly, we wouldn't have seen that pattern there, and we wouldn't be able to go to the new employer and say, this guy's done this before, he's probably going to do it again. You guys need to take some serious action to stop it. And of course, if they aren't able to or won't, then Occupational Health and Safety will step in for the safety of the workers in the workplace. Now, Regulation 36, an employer must, in consultation with the OHC or employee representative, develop and implement a harassment policy. So you have to have a harassment policy in accordance with the legislation, following the legislation. The policy must be posted and readily available to workers. I'm going to jump back a point. That policy, I've seen it as long as 50 pages, and I've seen it as little as 2 pages. We have an example policy that we provided Occupational Health and Safety, along with a harassment prevention guide, and our policy is 2 pages long. It basically has to detail the definition of harassment, the complaints procedure, and indicate that at any time you can go to Occupational Health and Safety for both advice, or a complaint. You can't be punished for going to Occupational Health and Safety. That's it, 3 things. The policy must be posted, readily available to the workers. So in a lunchroom or on a work computer, provided everyone has the password to the work computer. Those are all valid examples of readily posted and available. Employers must implement effective policies to prevent and end harassment when it occurs. Actions include preventative measures, investigating complaints fairly, and stopping harassment when it occurs. Investigating complaints fairly is another thing that we receive a lot of complaints about. The employer has to ensure that the investigation is fair and impartial, and if the employer can't do it or doesn't feel that they can do it, then they must go to an independent third-party investigator. And that's sometimes a suggestion we make because we see there's a lot of workplace dynamics in every workplace, and sometimes the management is just a little too close to the complaints in order to effectively and impartially investigate it. So then it has to go to a neutral third party. Or, a lot of companies also have human resources departments, which by definition should be acting as a neutral third party. Now, the worker under the Act has a responsibility as well. The worker under Section 310B has a duty to refrain from causing or participating in harassment. So what should the victim do if they feel they're being harassed? If a worker is being harassed, he or she should, number 1, ask the perpetrator to stop. A lot of times that step is skipped because if you're being harassed or bullied, you usually aren't comfortable in confronting the harasser directly, but that is the recommended first step. Perhaps it is a miscommunication or a bit of an error, or perhaps it's more of a conflict than a harassment situation that can be resolved between 2 parties. Again, a lot of times that step is skipped. So the next step is, if the perpetrator does not stop, report it to a supervisor or other person named in the policy. That could be your supervisor, your manager, your HR department, the owner of the company, whoever's listed in the policy. There should be a mechanism in the policy to have more than one person to complain to. So we don't accept policies where the only person you can complain to is the owner of the company, because then who do you complain to if the owner's part of the harassment? Or the owner doesn't do anything about the harassment. So usually there's a chain of command in most companies. It's the supervisor, the manager, and so on and so forth. If your supervisor's harassing you, then you go to the manager, and so on up the chain. And then, again, if you get to the point where you've reached the top of the chain and perhaps it is the owner of the company, you can contact an occupational health officer. So what OHS does is we enforce the OHS legislation. We educate and inform workplaces with things like this presentation. Anti-harassment legislation applies only to workers as defined in the Act. So some people think that a worker is just an employee. It is not. Employees and workers are actually different definitions under the Saskatchewan Employment Act, but the definition of worker is in the Act, and it's somebody who it could be somebody like a volunteer or a subcontractor. Doesn't necessarily have to be an employee of the company. And OHS has jurisdictions over Saskatchewan's non-federal workplaces. So the federal workplaces are places like airports. A lot of businesses on First Nations are owned by First Nations. And the only way to kind of determine that is that you can bring your complaint forward, and then it'll be determined if it's federal or not. Railways and interprovincial trucking are two other ones that are also considered federal jurisdiction because they cross borders. When reporting to harassment, so workers can contact OHS to report they're being harassed. Employers can contact OHS for assistance or guidance or advice. Both employers and workers can do that. And depending on the situation, an informal or a formal process may be used. Susan had mentioned earlier that we do also in this ministry have mediation services, conflict resolution people that can come on. And a lot of our cases, whether they're deemed to be harassment or conflict, end with a mediator or conflict resolution person helping the workplace get back to some sense of normalcy and a positive way forward. And so the mediator will come in, the conflict resolution person will come in and kind of create a contract going forward for the worker, the managers, the alleged harasser, and so on. Informal process, an officer can provide information or coaching. An informal complaint can be anonymous. In cases of informal complaints where they are anonymous, there's no investigation done. It would be an inspection. We do an inspection of the workplace to ensure that there is a valid harassment policy and that there is a mechanism for complaint. The informal steps might include meeting with various people involved to see if the concerns can be resolved without a formal investigation. So again, those are situations that are maybe more conflict-based and perhaps can be resolved in-house or internally. The formal process, so that comes about more when the employer either has received a complaint, not done anything about it, has received a complaint and not investigated properly, or has received a complaint and maybe the investigation is taking an excessive amount of time. OHS can issue a harassment questionnaire. The worker fills out the questionnaire with a description of the events that occurred and maybe any action that's been taken by the employer. And then in the event of a formal investigation, confidentiality is important, but the complainant, cannot remain confidential or cannot remain anonymous. That's very important. Because the next step of occupational health and safety is to contact the employer and say, we understand you've received a complaint of harassment. We understand that it's been 5 months since anything's happened on it, or allegedly 5 months since anything's happened on it. Please tell us what you're doing to resolve this harassment complaint. The enforcement measures in writing. So this goes back to the earlier point. In writing, an occupational health officer will direct the employer to develop and implement a harassment policy if they don't already have one that meets the requirements of Regulation 36. We're going to require the employer to investigate the complaint, or if it's been investigated and maybe seen as not impartial or incomplete in some way, occupational health and safety can also do a review of that investigation to ensure that it was done properly. We can require the employer to ensure the worker is not exposed to further harassment. And, in more extreme cases, we can issue a notice of contravention, which is the NOC, a summary offense ticket, which is the SOT, which is a monetary ticket that can be offered like a speeding ticket, or issued like a speeding ticket. And in very extreme cases, it could go to the Ministry of Justice for a prosecution. Officers cannot require the perpetrator of harassment to be disciplined, terminated, or moved. I'd mentioned that earlier. Require the payment of compensation or damages. Now, Susan had mentioned earlier on discriminatory action. The worker has protection from reprisals. The Act under Section 335 forbids discriminatory action. That means an action taken against an employee for bringing up a workplace concern, whether it's a loose rung on a ladder, a faulty piece of equipment, or a workplace harassment complaint. So, it forbids that the employer takes action, discipline, termination, or suspension for victims who raise health and safety concerns or seek enforcement. Workers who raise harassment concerns and witnesses who give information during investigations are also protected. So if a number of workers come forward with a harassment complaint, all the witnesses are protected as well. And that's important for the complainant to note and express to their witnesses, so that their witnesses can come forward and corroborate their version of events. When this happens, the employers, when discriminatory action happens, or alleged discriminatory action happens, Occupational Health and Safety reaches out to the employer, and the employer is asked to provide good and sufficient other reasons for the discriminatory action. So the worker comes to us and says, I have a complaint that I was fired for bringing up a safety concern. Here's the safety concern. Here's the date I brought it up. Here's the date I was terminated. And it could be a termination. It could be a demotion, any kind of reprisal. We go to the employer and say, we actually use the wording, please provide us good and sufficient other reasons. Now, if the employer comes back to us and says, well, this is a terrible worker, he's been unsafe in the past and we were trying to keep him safe, we would weigh that out and in that case possibly find in favor of the employer. But we have to be able to draw the direct line between the safety concern and and the action taken against the worker. If an occupational health officer determines the employer is to take discriminatory action, the officer may order reinstatement and payment of lost wages. So in a case of where someone's terminated, that is the only time that Occupational Health and Safety can order compensation is if the investigation from Occupational Health and Safety takes a month, that worker's been fired for a month and they get reinstated in their position. We order that the wages be paid for that month that they were off while the investigation was being undertaken. And we also order them back into their old position. Any decision can be appealed that is made by an Occupational Health and Safety officer. An officer's written decision may be appealed to a special adjudicator who is independent of the ministry. The adjudicators are usually retired judges, and they will look at the evidence presented by both sides. So the employer says, I don't agree with this decision. I don't agree I need to reinstate this guy, or I don't agree that harassment occurred in my workplace. They need to present evidence as to why, and Occupational Health and Safety, of course, has their decision that they've made saying that there has been harassment. The adjudicator can then make a decision and can also use mediation or other dispute resolution techniques to assist the parties with a final settlement. So any worker needing information or help can go to their supervisor, their human resources branch, their occupational health committee, local union or official human rights commission, the Employee Family Assistance Program or Occupational Health and Safety, so EFAP as it's known, that's counselors. The Office of the Workers Advocate, they mainly deal with Workers' Compensation Board claims, WCB claims. When they've been denied, the Workers Advocate can assist in denied WCB claims. The Immigration Integrity Unit, which Susan had mentioned earlier, and the police if it is a criminal matter. We always say, which one are you, the fox, the sheep, or the sheepdog? I don't know what that one means, but I might turn that over to Susan. Susan will explain that one because that's a fun little thing, and then we'll put up our contact information.
Okay, so it's not a fox, Ian, it's a wolf.
It is a wolf, isn't it? Susan?
Okay, so yeah, I see it. Okay, so we always say at the end of our our presentation that we need one more type of person a lot more in the workplace. So think about yourself in the workplace, or think about others around you. What are you, or what are they? Are you a wolf? And is that's somebody that, you know, just for the sake of this presentation, that's going around looking for targets? Are you a sheepdog who is the target, or the one with their hands over their eyes saying, I don't see anything here? They don't want to get involved because they don't want to be the next target. Or are you possibly the sheepdog, which is a very rare commodity in our workplaces? And that's the one that's going to the sheep and they're saying, you know what, this isn't okay. I'm going to take you for help. They're saying to the wolf when they see it happening, you know what you're doing is not okay, and I'm going to report you. We need more of those. But there's one other, and they're the hidden one. And that's the one that I find particularly bad because they're hidden. They're your wolf in sheep's clothing. So, you know, if I'm a wolf in sheep's clothing, and I'm targeting Ian, and or I'm just helping the bully, I'm going to go to Ian. Hey, Ian, how are you doing? You know, you don't look very happy today. And Ian's saying, well, you know, what so and so has been doing to me, it's causing me to feel this way, and I'm getting sick, and I'm on medication, and this and that and that and this, and my wife is leaving me, whatever. And I'm like, oh, Ian, that's terrible. I'm so sorry to hear that. And then I go back to the bully and I'm like, haha, guess what Ian just told me? Okay, so we all know somebody like that in the workplace, and they're particularly bad because they're hidden, right? And they masquerade as somebody that's trying to help you. Okay, you don't need to do this. So if you have questions, like I said, we're going to put up our number here if you have anything you want to discuss. We don't really like to do it in this forum because most of it's confidential, and we find at presentations that we do in person that people come up to us on the side when everybody else is gone and want to talk then. So if you have questions, you might be listening to this a week from now, feel free to give us a call, and here's our contact information in Saskatoon. And in Regina, it's 1-800-567-7233, and ask for the harassment intake unit. Okay, so that's it. Hope you enjoyed it, and signing out.
Excellent. Well, thank you, you two. That was an excellent presentation with a lot of relevant information. I really and enjoyed and appreciated the stories and examples that you had. Just illustrates how this has happened or could happen in the workplace. So, you know, a really good information there. And thank you for taking the time today to prepare for this presentation and to present to us today. So I appreciate that.
No problem. You're welcome.
Right on. Thank you. And for the rest, if you'd like to join us again next week for our Toolbox Tuesday, when the topic will be on physical distancing, and also again for our webinar Wednesday, same time next week, when the topic will be on some of the common issues and mistakes that we at the SCSA see on fall protection. When it comes to fall protection, the application of it, specifically we'll be talking about some harness sizing and some of just the common mistakes and issues that we're seeing out in the industry and in the field. So again, thank you to our guest presenters today. Appreciate your time, and hope to see everyone again at a future time. Thank you.